Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So we're gonna get the Phase 1 banners of the 3.2 characters pretty soon with Castris. We have Fugue, Acheron, and Jiaoqiu. And I thought this rerun banner is really interesting because of certain factors. Because these characters were so strong on their release that many people are curious about their strength right now, and if they're even worth investing at this point. And I will be answering those questions in my humble opinion. So yeah, let's get this started, right? I won't be describing the kits of these characters because I'm just assuming that you already know their kits, and I will only be saying what their current value is and what you should look out for when you want to pull them. First, we got Fugue. Fugue is a character that pretty much relies on her exo toughness gimmick, which under the right situations is a pretty strong gimmick. If you want to use Butil, Himiko, and Rappa a lot, Fugue is pretty much a must pull. For Butil, he does gain a lot of increase from Fugue in terms of comfort and as well his versatility, because Butil, paradoxically, in situations where there's very few enemies at the first wave, his stack generation gets really slow, so having Fugue there makes it not exist pretty much. In Rappa's case, pretty much in any Rappa team, you want to use Fugue just because exo toughness gives her a lot of multipliers thanks to her talent, and with Himiko, it's also pretty much required to run Fugue because of how many stacks you could get from breaking, because exo toughness does count as a separate weakness bar. Additionally, if you don't need Remembrance MC and you have a DDD lying around, putting Fugue with Harmony MC isn't actually that bad of an idea, because there's so much action advance going around that you can do really impressive clears with your Super Break team. And if you're pretty impatient and you want to get Ron May already, then you actually have access to the easiest sustainless team in the game. With HMC, Fugue, and Ron May, there's so much delay that it's really easy to clear without a sustain. If you don't want to run sustainless because you need RMC for the other side or something, you can also use Gallagher, who is on her banner, which makes it very easy to get him too. Again, Fugue's value really depends on how much you still want to use the best Super Break characters, and because her teams are really cheap right now because of free Ron May, and also in general Super Break is one of the cheaper teams, your only issue really is that you kinda want a limited Super Break DPS. Himiko is still fine, but outside of pure fiction, you do want a lot of fire weakness for her to break much easier. However, the current trend of elements with the new characters doesn't seem like they're going to be favoring fire that much pretty soon, so it may take a while for Himiko to be coming back to MOC without 5 cycling or more. You can also use Fugue with Acheron as a stack generator. I did it before by putting Fugue's skill on Tribi and letting Tribi swallow up attack and basic attack and ultimate charge Acheron's ultimate, but it is still a meme at the end of the day. I do not recommend you use it, but if you're committed to the bit, you can actually clear with it, and it's quite funny that it happens. To summarize what I said about Fugue, Fugue would actually be really cheap because of the free Ron May, giving you the meta sustainless Super Break team. This is the safest sustainless team in the game that I actually suggest doing it. But without a limited Super Break character, I really would suggest against using Fugue. You can still do really funny PF Himiko setups because it is strong enough, but in any other mode, fire weakness is just too important to Himiko that I would recommend just pulling Fugue if you only have a Super Break limited DPS. Or I guess if you're a Shuei main, one of the 5 left in the world. If you want to vertically invest in Fugue because you already have her, she can work without her LC, and she does have good options in the Lightcon department. It is Nihility after all. And her E1 is really strong because it gives a weakness break efficiency to the skill target, and that is such a rare buff that obviously it's going to be your priority over signature. Next, let's talk about Jiaoqiu, one of the most controversial characters in the game. Jiaoqiu he's a really good character. However, he suffers from the perpetual second best syndrome. Actually, right now he's second to third best because sometimes Tribi outpaces him, but anyway. Jiaoqiu is a really good character in a sense that in every team, he works because of how rare his debuff is and how universal it is. However, there's only one team he's really the best at, which is an Acheron team. team, which means that if you don't own any limited supports, Jiaoqiu's value is really high because he's so flexible. But if you do have a lot of limited supports, Jiaoqiu gets lost in the shuffle because he's always the second best in that role. That's why if you pull Jiaoqiu, I don't think you will regret his performance because he's so flexible. I'm not really sure on how people are going to think of it. However, I am sure of one thing. If you have Acheron at any capacity and want to use her, Jiaoqiu is pretty much a requirement at this point for her to feel amazing. I used Acheron for a year without Jiaoqiu, and even though I had better relics, when I used a viewer's account who had weaker relics but had an E0 Jiaoqiu, it felt much better to run that E0 Jiaoqiu with worse relics on Acheron. The performance really is night and day, and especially in situations with PF and the current AoE shilling, Jiaoqiu is just way too good for Acheron at this point that I would not recommend skipping him if you want to use Acheron in any way. However, like I said, if you already have limited supports with their teams fleshed out, like for example if you have a Sunday team fleshed out, if you have a Tribi team fleshed out with My Day or something, if you have follow-up already fleshed out, then I don't think Jiaoqiu is going to be that big of a pull for your account. But if you want to vertically invest in Jiaoqiu because you already have him, his SIG is actually really good and is pretty universal, honestly. Even Kafka can use it. But if you want to use Jiaoqiu as a support, he does have alternatives with Pearls, or if you're running another defense shredder like Pela, you could also use Tutorial. If you want to invest into him more as a support, his E1 is insane. I mean, just look at it. And if you have his E1, it gives you one step closer to E2, which does make him a viable fire DOT DPS. So if you still want to run DOT in the year 2025, I guess you can chase for E2 just to make Jiaoqiu actually replace Black Swan, or maybe run with Black Swan if you want. The last character is Acheron. I've pretty much given my review of Acheron by talking about Jiaoqiu, but I guess I should add some extra stuff here. When Acheron released, she was able to use very cheap teams with Pela, Gwynaifen, and she can even use someone like Silverwolf, Welt, even Sampo, or again, even something as whack as Fugue can work too. But these days, if you want Acheron to be competitive, her cost has increased and she needs Jiaoqiu. If you want to compare Acheron with the newer DPS, so for example if we compare Acheron with Aglaya, Acheron works better at lower cost, her floor is generally higher, while Aglaya's ceiling is much higher. If we compare her to the Herta, Acheron can perform better in single target because of how she works. She's not reliant on 5 enemies for her core mechanics and energy. If we want to compare to My Day, well, Acheron can target enemies and she's mostly AoE anyway, so it's not that much of a competition. But My Day does have better raw numbers if you can account for the autoplay. Acheron is target agnostic, meaning she doesn't care about how many enemies on the field there are. Her floor is high enough to clear with it, and because of how Jiaoqiu works, pretty much any endgame mode can't be stopped by Acheron. In PF, if you have Jiaoqiu, it's really easy to clear with Acheron. If you're in Apocalyptic Shadow, it's also pretty nice. If you're in MOC with Jiaoqiu, it's also really good too. And because of how Jiaoqiu works, you can't get stopped by burn immune stages or any of that, if they even do show up. So yeah, if you have Acheron's team, it's really easy to brute force with her. Acheron's value is pretty similar to Yun Li right now, but much stronger. Acheron can work in any target scenario, she's really easy to play, and because of the lack of enemy mechanics that stops Jiaoqiu and her, it makes her really flexible and can work in pretty much any fight. To talk about her investment, she really wants her signature, however she does have really good alternatives which are actually on the Lightcone banner, so if you lose for Acheron's signature, you can at least get some 4-star copies as a good enough consolation prize. If you want to invest in her Eidolons, her E1 is not that good. Its value is pretty much to just be a stepping stone to her E2, which cuts down Nihility requirements. But if you don't have SIG, I would prioritize that first over E1 to E2. The 4 stars on the banner also help out her value a lot because you have Pela, one of her best 4-star debuffer options, and you also have Gallagher, one of her best sustain options. So if you're a new player, I wouldn't actually suggest pulling for Acheron or Jiaoqiu unless you can get both. If you can scrum up enough resources to pull 2 limited characters, I would suggest pulling Acheron and Jiaoqiu. However, if you're a newer player, that's very unlikely to happen, and I would just recommend pulling Castris because Castris' startup cost is much lower than Acheron at this point. She can legitimately run Pela, RMC, and Gallagher and output as much, if not more damage than Acheron, so yeah. That's pretty much it. Those are my thoughts on those characters, and I hope you guys like this video. Like, comment, and subscribe. Do the algorithm stuff. Thank you to all my members. Please join my membership if you want access to members-only streams or videos, and you get my videos early too. Thanks to Man42 for the highest tier in my memberships, the unrealistic expectations tier, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.